He was just a quiet mechanic in the middle of the desert until one stormy night, a private jet made an emergency landing and everything changed. What began as a routine engine repair turned into something far more unexpected, something that would test the power of kindness, trust, and the quiet choices that change a life forever. Before we dive in, if you love heartwarming stories that restore your faith in people, make sure to subscribe and join us on this journey. Now let's begin. Poor mechanic was hired to fix a jet engine. He didn't know the passenger was a billionaire bride. The storm came in fast, black clouds tumbling over the low hills of northern Nevada, dragging lightning behind them like silver whips. Rain lashed the rusted siding of the old hangar as if the sky itself was trying to rip it apart. Inside, Ethan McCabe wiped his hands on a rag already stained with years of oil and grit, listening to the wind howl through the cracked roof. He should have gone home an hour ago, but the call had come in just before closing. A jet, private, emergency landing, mid-flight engine failure, and the only mechanic for 50 miles worth calling, at this hour, him. Ethan had thought his days of crawling under million-dollar machines were over. Years ago, he'd worn a jumpsuit embroidered with the name of a major airline and walked with the kind of confidence that came from fixing what others couldn't. But after the whistleblowing, the truth he told that no one wanted to hear, his career crashed harder than any plane ever had. Now he worked alone. No bosses, no contracts, just the hangar, a battered pickup, and the ghosts of what used to be. He grabbed his toolbox and squinted out into the storm. The runway lights flickered as a jet loomed out of the dark, shuddering as it rolled to a stop on the wet tarmac. Sleek silver and clearly expensive, it hissed like some wounded beast. A figure stepped out from the open hatch, small-hooded, and clearly not the pilot. The cabin door slammed behind her. Ethan jogged out into the rain, blinking through the downpour. A man, mid-40s, uniformed, was waiting by the engine with a flashlight. "You, McCabe?" "That's me," Ethan replied, squatting down beside the engine's intake. "What happened?" "Pressure dropped mid-air. We lost partial thrust. She ordered us down immediately." "She?" The man nodded toward the figure in the distance, who now stood just beyond the landing lights. Even from here, Ethan could sense something off, rigid posture soaking wet despite a coat that looked like it cost more than his truck. She didn't flinch in the storm. She stood there like she belonged to it. "I'll take a look," Ethan said. "Tell her it might be a while." "She doesn't talk much, but I'll pass it along." The engine's casing was hot to the touch, even soaked. Ethan popped the panel and hissed through his teeth. Whoever had last serviced this jet had cut corners seals, not flushed one connector, bypassed with a temporary clamp, probably to save time. Idiots. He worked without looking up, fingers precise brain, ticking through possible failures and what he'd need to jury-rig a fix tonight. The hangar's supplies were old but plentiful, and if the power didn't cut out, he could... "Is it serious?" The voice came from behind him, low, steady and utterly calm. He turned. She'd come closer now, close enough that he could see her face under the hood. Young, early 30s maybe. Dark hair, wet and curling. Her eyes were striking, not just because of their pale grey colour, but because they held nothing back. No fear, no desperation. Just quiet resolve.
"I've seen worse," Ethan said, standing slowly. "But it's going to take hours. Could be morning." She nodded. "I don't mind waiting. You sure storm's not letting up? I've waited in worse places." Ethan hesitated. Something in her tone, flat but heavy, like the tail end of a long confession, stuck with him. "We've got a couch and some coffee back in the hangar. Dry place to wait." She looked past him toward the plane.
"No one else will come looking." That's a strange question, Ethan thought. I doubt it. She gave a single nod. Then yes. Thank you. He led the way back to the hangar, unlocking the door and flipping on a buzzing overhead light. The place smelled like steel and motor oil lived in and honest. He tossed her a towel and offered her his father's old flannel coat which hung on a peg near the door. Sorry, he said, not exactly cashmere. She smiled faintly and put it on. It dwarfed her frame. He poured 2 mugs of coffee and motioned to the old couch in the corner. She sat, hands cradling the mug like it was something holy. For a long minute neither of them spoke. Rain hammered the roof. Somewhere a wrench shifted on a metal shelf. I'm Ethan, he said finally. She looked at him. Clara. Nice to meet you, Clara. He paused. You okay? She gave the smallest nod. I'm just tired. He didn't ask tired of what. Instead, he said, you'll be safe here tonight. I'll get that bird flying again. Might not be pretty, but she'll hold. Clara looked down into her coffee, then up at him again. Thank you. Ethan nodded. It's just a fix. No, she said quietly. It's more than that. And for a fleeting second, Ethan felt the air in the room shift. He didn't know who she was, or why she ran, or why her words carried the weight of something unfinished. But he did know one thing. This wasn't just another repair job. This was something else entirely. Something that just maybe he was meant to fix too. The storm raged through the night wind, rattling the hangar doors like a restless spirit. Ethan stood at the workbench, his tools spread out in a well-worn rhythm wrenches, lined up by size grease-stained gloves at the ready, a small radio humming an old country tune from the corner. He glanced back toward the couch where the woman calling herself Clara had fallen asleep wrapped in his father's flannel coat like it was armor. She didn't snore, didn't toss or turn. She simply slept, one arm tucked under her head, the other resting gently over her chest. Vulnerable, but not fragile. That was the word Ethan kept circling still. There was something deliberate in her stillness, like she'd spent her life learning how to vanish in plain sight. He turned back to the jet's engine diagram sketched across a sheet of butcher paper. The real damage wasn't catastrophic, but it was close. Whoever had installed the makeshift connector clearly didn't think the bird would be pushed hard. A gamble. A lazy one. Ethan hated lazy work. It risked lives. He worked for hours in silence, pencil dancing across schematics, marking a reroute of the auxiliary fuel pressure to avoid the damaged seal. The solution wasn't glamorous, but it was solid and safer than anything the original techs had cobbled together. As dawn began bleeding through the high windows, soft steps padded across the floor. Clara stood barefoot on the concrete hair, pulled back, now eyes clearer than the night before. You didn't sleep, she said. Didn't need to, you fixed it. He nodded. Engines stable. I'll run a diagnostic once the rain clears. You'll be airborne by noon. She held his gaze for a long moment. You didn't ask. Ask who I am. Why I was on that plane. Why I didn't give you my real name. Ethan leaned on the edge of the workbench. You looked like someone running from something. I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me. Clara looked away, lips pressed together like a secret, trying to stay sealed. She walked over to the bench and picked up one of the old aviation badges Ethan kept hung beside his father's tools. It was tarnished, the name barely legible. Your father? She asked. Ethan nodded. Harold McCabe taught me everything I know past a few years back. Cancer? I'm sorry. Don't be. He lived on his own terms, never cut corners, never took more than he earned. Ethan paused, then added with a half smile, he also believed in giving people space. Said the truth shows up when it's ready. Clara ran her thumb across the old badge. He sounds like the kind of man you don't meet in my world. Ethan watched her carefully. What world is that? She met his eyes again. One where everything is a transaction, where kindness is seen as a liability. He didn't respond right away. Then, well, lucky for you, we're not in that world right now. Something in her softened. She put the badge back gently as if it was something sacred. You ever think about leaving here, going back to the big leagues? Ethan chuckled. I did once, had a shot at becoming chief engineer, but I saw something that could have grounded a fleet, brought it to the higher-ups. They buried it. Then they buried me. They fired you, no worse. They made sure no one would hire me again, blacklisted. He shrugged. So I came home, fixed up this old place, haven't left since. Clara studied him like she was trying to see through time. And you still help people, just like that. It's what I know. Engines break, people break. Sometimes they just need someone to show up. She looked away, quickly blinking fast. He didn't press. Instead, he poured 2 more mugs of coffee, handed her one, and leaned against the wall beside her. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and golden. Light pooled across the floor, catching on specks of dust that danced like tiny fireflies. After a long silence, Clara asked if someone left everything behind, money, family status. Do you think they could start over? Really? Start over? Ethan sipped his coffee. Depends. On what? On whether they're running from something or towards something better. Clara smiled faintly. You ask good questions. No, Ethan said I just listen better than most. She sat back down on the couch, pulling the coat tighter around her. For a while there was nothing but the sound of the wind easing through the open vents and a bird somewhere beyond the hangar greeting the day. Finally, she said, I wasn't always Clara. Ethan looked over but said nothing. I grew up with another name. One that opens doors and locks hearts. One that people chase for all the wrong reasons. Still he didn't speak. I didn't lie because I didn't trust you, she continued. I lied because, for once, I wanted someone to look at me and not see dollar signs or headlines. Just see me. Ethan nodded slowly. Then I'm glad I didn't ask sooner. Her eyes welled and she looked away quickly. But she didn't cry. Not really, just blinked once, twice, and breathed a little deeper. Outside, the world was waking up. A jet engine waited quietly, whole again, but inside that hangar something more fragile had been repaired, something harder to name. You'll be flying by noon, Ethan repeated. Clara nodded. And you'll forget I was here? No, he said gently. But I won't follow. That's not who I am. Clara stood, stepped toward him, and for the first time she extended her hand. Thank you, she said. Ethan took it. You're welcome, whoever you are. Her grip lingered just a little longer than it had to. Then she turned and walked toward the open hangar door, sunlight casting her silhouette in gold. And Ethan, for reasons he couldn't explain, felt like something important had just passed through his life, not like a storm, more like a change in the wind. The rain had stopped, but the storm hadn't quite left. It lingered in the air like the echo of an argument, low and unsettled. The hangar was quieter now, with the jet engine cooled and checked, and the tarmac outside slicked with light. Ethan moved slowly, packing up his tools and brushing metal filings from the workbench, though there was no real rush. He glanced across the space every now and then where Clara sat alone on the edge of the old couch, staring into nothing. She hadn't boarded the plane yet. It was odd, Ethan thought. Most passengers, especially high-paying ones, wanted to get back in the air the moment a problem was solved. But Clara didn't seem in any hurry. She held the flannel coat he'd lent her fingers, tracing the seams like they were braille, as if she were reading a story only she understood. "Engine's good," Ethan said at last, breaking the silence. "I ran it twice. She's ready whenever you are." Clara looked up, her eyes slightly red around the rims, not from crying, he guessed, but from too little sleep and too many secrets. "Thank you," she said softly. "You said that already?" She offered a weak smile. "Then I guess I mean it twice." Ethan grabbed 2 mugs and poured the last of the coffee. It had gone bitter, but it was warm. He handed one to her and sat on a nearby stool, the two of them framed in the silence that only came after a long, unspoken conversation. After a moment, Clara said, "You ever wonder how you got here?" He raised an eyebrow. "In this hangar every day. No, I mean, not just physically, but emotionally, morally. Like, when did your life take a turn that you couldn't undo?" He considered that, maybe the day I spoke up. About a design flaw in a pressure valve system. It was small, but I knew it could fail if a pilot pulled a hard bank too fast. What happened? I got a warning to stay quiet. I didn't. So I got sidelined, then blacklisted. He took a sip of the coffee. People said I should have kept my mouth shut, that the odds of that kind of failure were too low to matter. But to me, one life mattered. Always does. Clara was still. "You're a rare kind of man, Ethan." "I used to think that was a compliment," he said. "Now I think it's just what people say before they walk away." She looked down, tightening her grip on the mug. "I almost got married yesterday." He didn't flinch, but something in his posture shifted, still grounded like a man bracing for impact. "I was dressed. Makeup done. Cathedral booked. Press waiting." She let out a dry laugh. There was even a segment on morning television about it. "America's tech princess marries energy heir." He finally spoke. "You ran, I ran." Why, she hesitated, as if picking her words from a shelf full of locked drawers. "Because I realized I was about to spend my life in a story I didn't write, a deal disguised as a marriage, a future prepackaged in silver and silk. And your groom. He didn't love me. He loved the merger, the family name. I was part of the brand." Ethan didn't interrupt. Just listened, the way men do when they've spent a long time in their own silence. "I couldn't breathe," she continued. "I got into the car and told the driver to take me to the hangar. I didn't even have a plan. Just knew I needed to disappear, even if only for one night." "And now?" he asked gently. She shrugged. "Now I don't know who I am when I'm not someone's daughter or someone's investment." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You're the kind of person who says thank you and means it twice." That pulled a real smile from her, the kind that starts in the eyes before it finds the mouth. "Maybe that's a start," she said. "Could be," Ethan said. "Most good engines don't roar when they start back up. They hum, quietly, purposefully." They sat like that for a long while, the edge of dawn creeping closer, their cups now empty, but their conversation full. Clara's shoulders had dropped slightly, like she had laid something down, not her guard exactly, but the weight of pretending. "I'll leave before the sun's fully up," she said. "Less questions that way." "Suit yourself," Ethan replied, "but you can stay longer if you want. The world will wait." "No," she said, "it won't. Not for me, but maybe I can choose how I step back into it." He nodded slowly. "That's the most any of us can do." Clara rose from the couch and walked to the door of the hangar, staring out at the waiting jet, bathed in the earliest light. Then she turned back. "If you had said the wrong thing tonight," she said, "I might have gotten back on that plane and kept running. But you didn't. You just let me be." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said what he knew was true. Sometimes the best fix is just sitting with something long enough to see where the crack really is. Clara stepped closer. You're not just good with machines, Ethan, and you're not just good at disappearing, Clara. They held each other's gaze in silence. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was something rare, recognition, not of faces or names, but of spirit, of loneliness met with understanding, of a temporary harbour in a storm that neither had fully named. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. If you ever need anything, she said, handing it to him, call this number, but only if you really need it. He accepted it without unfolding it. I don't usually call in favours. Then maybe this one's not a favour, she said. Maybe it's a thank you, a third one. Then she turned, walked into the dawn, and disappeared up the steps of the jet. Ethan watched the plane taxi down the runway and lift into the glowing horizon, its roar fading into a hum. He didn't open the paper until long after the sky had turned blue, and when he didn't smile or curse or laugh. He simply nodded once, tucked it into his chest pocket, and went back to cleaning his tools, because something told him this wasn't the last time he'd hear from the woman who wasn't really named Clara. The morning after Clara's departure unfolded slowly like a Sunday hymn in a quiet church. The hangar, usually filled with the steady rhythm of wrench and socket, sat in rare stillness. Ethan moved through it, methodically tightening shelf brackets, refilling his bolt bins, sweeping dust from under the workbench, but his mind wasn't on the work. It had been only a few hours, but her absence already changed the place. Or maybe he admitted to himself it had changed him. He opened the drawer where she'd left the flannel coat folded neatly before boarding her jet. Inside it, something small and unexpected, a shoelace black leather knotted with care around a snapped aglet. It was from the boot she wore, the one he had silently fixed with a dab of glue and a steady hand while she was asleep on the couch. She hadn't said anything about it. Not then. Not when she left. Just tucked the repaired boot back on and walked into the sunrise. Ethan held the knotted lace in his palm. Something so insignificant it barely existed. Yet it struck him harder than any thank you, because he understood what it meant. I noticed. That gesture of care hadn't gone unseen. It had mattered. That was enough. He slid the lace into his shirt pocket next to the folded piece of paper she'd given him and let out a slow breath. Later that day, a call came in from a young pilot named Denny who flew crop dusters for the nearby farms. Ethan had helped him patch up his Cessna the year before, and since then the kid had brought by broken parts and cold beer in equal measure. This time, Denny showed up with a busted magneto and a puzzled look on his face. "You okay, Ethan?" he asked, as they stood over the parts table. Ethan blinked out of his thoughts. "Yeah? Why, you look like someone just landed in your life and took off before you could catch your breath." Ethan chuckled despite himself. "Something like that. Well, whatever it was, you're different, calmer, softer around the edges. That obvious, huh? To me, sure. But I'm not the one who needs to notice." They spent the afternoon replacing gaskets and swapping flying stories, but Ethan's thoughts kept drifting, not just to Clara, but to something deeper, something her visit had stirred. For years he'd convinced himself he was okay with this life, the solitude, the simplicity, the silence. But now it all felt slightly askew, like a song played in the wrong key. That night, Ethan returned to the sketch pad where he sometimes scribbled engine layouts and problem-solving diagrams. But instead of mechanical blueprints, his pencil moved in unfamiliar patterns, curved lines, wide wings, an open hangar drawn from memory. He sketched a schematic that wasn't about pressure valves or compression ratios. It was about people. He drew a hangar redesigned as a community workshop, open bays, training stations, a small classroom tucked in the back. A simple name etched across the front: McCabe Aviation and Training. He stared at the page. An idea that had once seemed impossible now felt almost inevitable. Maybe he thought this is what she meant when she asked if people could start over. Maybe kindness, real kindness, wasn't just a single act. Maybe it was momentum, like an engine catching a spark. You didn't need to build a legacy overnight. You just needed to begin. The next morning, Ethan drove into town, a rare occurrence for him. He pulled into the hardware store, picked up fresh lumber sealant and 2 new heaters. Then on the way back, he stopped by the community center. An old friend, Mrs. Goodwin, ran volunteer programs for teens in foster care. She blinked twice when she saw him walk in. "Ethan McCabe," she said, her voice teasing. "Well, I'll be." "To what do we owe the miracle, I was wondering?" He said, "if you had any kids interested in learning aircraft maintenance." She looked at him for a beat, as if checking for sarcasm. Then, seeing only sincerity, her eyes softened. "Plenty," she said. "They just need someone to believe they're worth the effort." "I got tools, time and space," he said. "Maybe it's time that place became more than a graveyard for forgotten engines." She smiled warm and wide.
You let me know when you're ready. I'll bring the kids. You bring the patients.
That afternoon, back at the hangar, Ethan began clearing a corner of the workshop. He swept out years of dust, reorganized his shelves, and began mounting whiteboards and tool racks. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was a beginning. As he worked, a delivery truck pulled into the lot, no markings, just clean white paint and tinted windows. Ethan set down his drill and stepped outside. A woman in a navy blue blazer emerged holding a slim folder. "Mr. McCabe?" she asked. "That's me." She handed him the folder. This was sent by Ms. Harrington. Ethan didn't flinch, just accepted the folder with a nod. He waited until the truck pulled away before he opened it. Inside was a typed letter on cream paper, signed Celeste A. Harrington. No branding, no logos, just her name. The letter was short. "Ethan, you once fixed something for me without asking what it was or why it mattered. That kind of grace is rare. I've enclosed a small token, not of repayment, but of faith. Faith in the kind of world that might be built by hands like yours." See, behind the letter was a check. Not excessive, not obscene, but more than enough to buy equipment, renovate the space, register a program. There was also a second paper unsigned, handwritten, in clean looping script. "You didn't ask me who I was, but you saw me anyway. That's more than most have ever done." Ethan stood in the middle of the hangar, paper in hand, eyes damp but not broken. Kindness wasn't loud. It didn't wave flags, it didn't shout for credit. It was a warm coat placed on a stranger's shoulders, a shoe quietly mended, a safe space offered with no conditions. And sometimes that kind of kindness changed everything. It started like any other quiet morning at the hangar, black coffee metal shavings on his sleeves and the low hum of a classic country tune drifting from the old radio on the shelf. Ethan moved with the calm certainty of someone who knew each bolt, pipe and socket as if they were extensions of his own bones. The sun filtered through the skylight in golden shafts, catching the fine dust in the air like floating fireflies. He'd just finished mounting a new vise to the corner workbench when the knock came, 2 quick raps on the steel door, followed by the creak of its hinges. Ethan turned, wiping his hands on a rag. Denny peeked in his shaggy brown hair, sticking up in all directions like he'd wrestled the wind and lost. "You got the TV on?" Ethan squinted. "Haven't in years." Why Denny stepped in, holding up his phone like it was burning in his hand. "Because you're going to want to see this." Ethan sighed, took the phone, and glanced at the screen. There she was, Celeste Harrington, the billionaire bride who vanished just hours before the most high-profile wedding in recent memory. She was standing on a podium beside her family's board of directors, camera flashes blinking like lightning behind her. But Ethan didn't see any of that. He saw the coat she wore under her blazer. His coat. The flannel one she had folded so neatly before leaving. The video continued. Celeste, calm and composed, reading a prepared statement about reconsidering the role of personal freedom and corporate obligation. Her voice, steady eyes, direct. She didn't mention the wedding. She didn't mention where she had gone. But Ethan knew, because he'd sat across from her on a rainy night while she clutched a mug of bitter coffee like it was her last thread to sanity. Denny whistled long and low. Man, you had her here. Ethan handed the phone back. Didn't know it then. Think she'll come back, I doubt it. You okay with that? Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't sure yet. That afternoon he tried to focus on his work, but the hangar felt different. Like something sacred had been momentarily revealed, only to be pulled back behind a curtain. He kept replaying the moments, her questions, her silence, her eyes. The way she looked when she asked, "Do you think someone can really start over?" She hadn't asked that for no reason. She'd been looking for a doorway out of the life she was born into. And she'd found one in the last place she'd expected, in his hangar, in his silence. He walked over to the drawer where he'd stashed her note and the small check from her foundation. He reread her words slow this time, as if they might have changed. This is not repayment, it's faith. He placed the letter back down and opened the envelope again, this time pulling out a third sheet, one he hadn't noticed before. It was a photocopy of a news clipping. The headline read, "Small Town Mechanics Engine Fix Prevents Major Incident in Mid-Air Emergency." Ethan scanned the article. A private charter scheduled just days after Celeste's flight had suffered a fuel pressure drop over Montana. But thanks to the new rerouting system recently implemented, one based off an independent engineer's field, notes the pilot landed safely with no injuries. His notes, the handwritten sketch he'd jotted for the pilot as a precaution. She'd given it to someone. He sat down slowly, the weight of it hitting him in waves. That quiet act, rerouting the fuel line just to be thorough, had saved lives, and no one knew it was him. Except her. Later that night, the sky opened wide with stars. The storm had rinsed everything clean, and the chill of early spring crept in. Ethan stood outside the hangar, watching the moon cast silver over the metal roof. He heard the crunch of gravel behind him and turned to see Mrs. Goodwin stepping out of her van. "You working late again?" she asked. He smiled. "I think the work's just beginning." She walked beside him, arms crossed against the breeze. "The kids are excited. I told them about your training idea. 2 already asked if they could help repaint the walls." He nodded. "Good. They'll have a place. Somewhere to learn. Somewhere to feel worth something. You know," she said gently, "people spend their whole lives waiting for someone to say they matter." He looked at her. "Yeah, seems like someone said that to you recently." "Not in words," he replied. "But yeah, they did." She studied him for a moment. "You're changing, Ethan." "I hope so. Just be sure it's towards something good, not away from something painful." He thought about that. About all the years he'd kept his world small because it was safer. About how one woman stepping into that world for just one night had cracked it wide open. "It's both," he finally said. "But I'm walking towards something now." She patted his arm. "Then keep walking. And don't look back too long. You might miss who's about to show up next." That night, Ethan sat on the couch in the hangar and stared up at the old skylight. He could see only a sliver of the stars, but it was enough. He thought about her. Not as Celeste Harrington, billionaire heiress, runaway bride, or business mogul, but as Clara, the woman who drank burnt coffee without complaint, who wore his coat like armor, who asked hard questions with a quiet kind of desperation. He didn't know what her world looked like now, but he knew this his world was no longer the same. Not because she had left it, but because she had passed through it. And sometimes that was all it took. Not a rescue, not a romance, just a moment of genuine connection between two people trying to fix their own broken wings. The boardroom was a glass temple perched high above Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a city that never slept, but Celeste Harrington stood still, as if time had been paused just for her. 12 men and women in tailored suits lined the polished walnut table before her, their expressions varying from concern to veiled irritation. The Harrington-Highland merger was all but finalized, billions in contracts, signed press releases, drafted guest lists, curated. Except the bride had walked out. And now she had returned, not to apologize, not to explain, but to reclaim something far more dangerous than money or legacy. Her voice. "I want this added to the minutes," she said, placing a folder gently on the table. "Effective immediately, I resign as CEO of Harrington Technologies." Gasps rippled through the room. A chair scraped sharply as one board member half rose, only to sit back down at a steely glance from Celeste. "Ms. Harrington," said a greying man at the far end, his tones smooth with disbelief, "surely we can discuss this in closed session. There are stakeholders." "This is my decision," she said. "It is not up for negotiation, but what about the merger? The foundation, your equity? I've retained my shares. I'm not giving up what I built, but I am stepping away from the seat at this table. I'm done being the product." She let the words land with calm clarity. "From now on, I want to build something that actually helps people who never get a seat in rooms like this." There was silence. Pure, bristling silence. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out a single-page proposal. Simple, clean, no legalese, just a plan. With a title across the top, the McCabe Fellowship for Aviation Mechanics Funding, she said, for vocational scholarships and community aviation centers to train and equip skilled workers from underserved regions. Mechanics, technicians, ground crew. Someone scoffed. "With all due respect, Miss Harrington, that's quaint." "It's real," she said, eyes flashing, "and it saves lives." She placed a second page beside the first, a newspaper clipping, a private charter over Montana, a mid-air emergency avoided due to a rerouted fuel line system based on field notes submitted by an unaffiliated independent engineer. Ethan McCabe's work. She didn't say his name, but she didn't have to. "He never asked for credit?" she said, voice quiet now. "Didn't even know what he'd done. That's the kind of person I want to build things for. That's who we should all be working for." She stepped back, straightened her shoulders, and nodded once. "I've signed the transition documents. The new CEO can handle the merger, but I'll be in Nevada at a hangar. Most of you would be too proud to set foot in helping men and women who know the value of doing a job right even when no one's looking." And with that, she left the boardroom. Not in disgrace, not in defeat, but with the poise of a woman walking away from a golden cage she had once mistaken for home. 3 days later, Celeste arrived at a modest co-working studio tucked between a bakery and a bicycle repair shop in Reno. Her assistant Tanya, a fiercely competent woman who'd remained loyal through the storm, met her with a tablet and a raised brow. "Just confirming, Tanya said we're skipping the shareholder gala tonight to drive 2.5 hours into the desert to tour a garage." "It's not a garage," Celeste said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's a hangar." Tanya gave her a look. "Right, very different." Celeste smiled, but it was quiet, reflective. "You don't have to come." Tanya folded her arms. Someone needs to take notes when your life becomes a Netflix series. They left before dusk. Back in the desert, Ethan worked late, as he often did now. The hangar had transformed in small but meaningful ways. Fresh paint adorned the side walls. 2 teenagers from Mrs. Goodwin's program had stopped by that morning to help organize tools. One of them, a 17-year-old named Luis, had shadowed Ethan all afternoon, asking questions about torque, compression, and even jet fuel behavior in crosswinds. Ethan liked him immediately. There was something in the boy's hunger to understand a mirror of his own younger self when he'd taken apart his dad's lawnmower just to figure out how it worked. Now the work felt lighter, less about routine, more about renewal. As the last light faded behind the ridge, headlights cut through the dark. A sleek black SUV rolled down the gravel path, slowed near the hangar, and stopped. Ethan froze, wiping grease from his hands, heart tapping faster without permission. The passenger door opened, and out stepped Celeste, not in a designer coat, not in heels, just jeans boots and a soft grey sweater. Her hair was tied back, and her expression, it wasn't guarded anymore, it was hopeful. "Hey," she said. Ethan stood still, unsure what to say. "Then I figured I wouldn't see you again. I thought about staying away," she said. "But I owed you more than a note." "You didn't owe me anything, I know," she said. "But I wanted to come anyway." Tanya climbed out next, holding a leather portfolio and clearly trying not to intrude. She wandered toward the edge of the lot, pretending to check her phone. Celeste walked closer. "I quit," she said, "or resigned, or redefined, whatever word makes the most sense." Ethan gave a small nod. "I saw the press conference. You were brave." She smiled, grateful. "I'm starting something new, something real, and I want this place to be part of it." He looked around as if seeing the hangar through her eyes. "It's just an old building." "No," she said, stepping past him, touching the frame of the hangar door. "It's the place where someone gave me shelter, asked me nothing, fixed my boot, and reminded me what it means to be human." They stood there side by side, not touching, but close enough to share the silence. "I'm not asking to take over," she said. "I just want to help build something with you. Not as a Harrington, just as someone who needed this place as much as you did." Ethan turned to her. His voice was low but steady. "You're sure you want to stay in this world? It's quieter, dirtier, less shiny." She smiled, eyes soft. "That's exactly why I'm here." And for the first time, Ethan reached out, not to offer her a coat or coffee or an exit, but his hand. "Then let's build something worth remembering," he said. She took his hand, and this time she didn't let go. The invitation arrived not by email or courier, but in an envelope, real weighty, the paper thick with texture. Ethan found it wedged under the door of the hangar one quiet morning, sealed in wax, bearing an embossed symbol he didn't recognize at first. Inside was a single card with elegant black lettering. "You are cordially invited to attend the Western Regional Aviation Symposium as an honored guest and contributor. Keynote recognition, Ethan McCabe, independent engineer, McCabe Aviation and Training. Your presence would be deeply valued. C.A." He read it twice, then a third time, as if expecting the letters to rearrange themselves into something more plausible. He wasn't a man of suits or stages. He wasn't a keynote anything. He was just a guy who fixed things when they broke, when they squeaked, when no one else could be bothered. The idea of being flown out, recognized, honored, it felt alien. Still, he tucked the envelope inside his old tackle box where he kept spare keys and his father's dog tags. Then he returned to work, half hoping, half fearing the subject would vanish like a mirage. But of course it didn't. 2 days later, Mrs. Goodwin stopped by with a bag of donated coveralls and a grin that said she knew something. So she said, placing the bag on a work table, "You going to that fancy aviation event next weekend?" Ethan didn't look up from the carburetor he was adjusting. "Don't see why I should, because someone out there thinks you belong in the room. I belong right here." She folded her arms. "You keep saying that like it's a badge of honor, but Ethan, belonging here doesn't mean you're not allowed to belong elsewhere too." He tightened, a bolt jaw set. "It's not my world, maybe not," she said gently. "But maybe the world needs to meet the kind of man who makes this one better." Later that evening, Ethan stood outside the hangar, watching the wind tug at a string of triangular flags the kids had strung across the entrance, bright reds, blues, and whites. They'd painted the letters MCT on one of the walls, McCabe Community Training. It was messy, uneven, but full of heart. Louise had stayed late tinkering with an old propeller fan. The boy was all questions and boundless curiosity, and Ethan couldn't help but see pieces of himself in him, except maybe braver. "You ever been on a plane?" Louise asked suddenly. Ethan blinked. "A few times." "You like it?" "I liked what it stood for. Flight, freedom, the idea that we're not stuck where we started." Louise turned back to the fan. "I'd like to fly one day. Not as a pilot, just be part of something that big." Ethan smiled faintly. "You already are." The night before the symposium, Ethan sat at the edge of his bed, the envelope now creased from how often he'd handled it. The paper still smelled faintly of cedar and ink. His duffel bag sat unpacked beside him, untouched. He didn't know what he feared more, being seen or not being understood. But somewhere in the back of his mind he heard her voice. "You didn't ask me who I was, but you saw me anyway." Maybe this was his chance to let someone see him. The symposium took place at a resort tucked into the Nevada hills, a gleaming testament to aviation's golden age, all polished brass and vintage photos. Ethan arrived in his only clean blazer, the one he'd worn to his father's memorial. He felt out of place the moment he stepped into the lobby. But then he saw her, Celeste. Not on stage, not in a spotlight. Just standing near the registration desk, talking to a young woman in a wheelchair who had a binder of engineering sketches in her lap. Celeste was listening intently, humbly, and then laughing at something the girl said. She looked up and spotted Ethan across the lobby. Their eyes met, and in that moment everything quieted. No press, no suits, no barriers. She walked toward him. "You came," she said, her voice soft with surprise and relief. "I wasn't going to," he admitted. "But a 17-year-old called me a coward without realizing it." Celeste smiled. "Smart kid." They stood together in the atrium, surrounded by people who lived in a world of charts and specs and titles, and yet this moment felt like its own kind of flight. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "A little." "You don't have to speak if you don't want to." "I think I do." She nodded, encouraging but unpressuring. "There's no right way to do it. Just say what's real." He glanced at the large projection screen being set up in the adjoining hall. What if no one listens? Then you'll still be the man who built something honest. That's more than most can say. That afternoon, the hall was filled with engineers, mechanics, pilots, students, and industry leaders. When Ethan was called to the stage, he walked with steady steps and a quiet heart. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. He told them about his father's hands, rough with labor, but gentle when teaching, about the importance of paying attention to the details no one sees, about a cracked fuel line that no one thought to question, about the night he stayed up in the middle of a storm fixing a plane for a woman he didn't know, and how that one act, quiet, unpaid, unpublicized, had started something that might just save lives. He finished with this machine's break. People do too. But if we take the time to really look, not just diagnose, but care, then maybe we can help each other fly again. When he stepped down, the applause didn't roar. It rolled like something deep, earned and real. And when he returned to his seat, Celeste didn't say anything. She just reached over and gave his hand the gentlest squeeze. He squeezed back, because now he wasn't afraid to be seen. Not anymore. The hall buzzed with warm conversation and soft clinking of glasses as the final evening reception of the symposium unfolded beneath a vaulted ceiling strung with lights. Jazz floated through the air, elegant and unintrusive. Exhibitors stood beside polished engine displays and flight simulators. Conversations about innovation and legacy, about market trends and mergers, drifted through the crowd like vapors of a distant world. Ethan stood near the edge of the room, a plate of untouched appetizers in one hand and a glass of club soda in the other. His collar was still stiff from the earlier keynote, but he'd survived it. More than survived it. He'd spoken, and for once people had listened not out of obligation, but because his words had weight. "I heard what you said up there," a young woman said as she approached him. She looked to be in her late 20s, wearing a simple black dress and a lanyard marked Aviation Scholar. "You reminded me of my dad. He worked in the hangars his whole life. Said the most important part of a plane is the story behind it." Ethan smiled. "Your dad was a wise man." She grinned and nodded, then stepped back into the crowd. He watched her go, the simple exchange lingering like the aftertaste of something honest. And then he heard her voice. "Still don't like crowds, huh?" He turned, and there she was again. Celeste wore a slate blue dress, simple, elegant, unpretentious. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a silver pin keeping a few strands in place. She held no champagne, no speech cards, no spotlight, just her. "Still prefer machines," Ethan said with a smirk. "They don't interrupt as much." She stepped beside him, watching the room from his vantage point. "Well, you impressed them. The room's been buzzing all evening. One executive asked if you were planning to launch your own line of jet designs." Ethan chuckled. "I'm more of a patch it till it flies guy. Sometimes the people who know how to patch are the ones who know where things truly break." There was a quiet between them, not awkward, not tense, just full. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for showing up, for speaking, for staying humble when you had every right not to." He looked at her, his voice low. "You gave me a reason. I might have opened the door," she said, "but you walked through it." They drifted along the edge of the crowd, shoulders nearly touching, but never quite. Celeste nodded toward a hallway branching off the main floor. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." Ethan followed her through the dimly lit corridor, past closed conference rooms and framed photographs of historical aircraft. At the far end stood a room marked Heritage Exhibit. She pushed open the door and led him inside. The room was quiet. Spotlights illuminated glass displays of flight instruments, logbooks, faded mechanic jackets, and handwritten engineering notes from decades past. But one exhibit tucked near the center stood out. Inside the glass sat a single clipboard. The paper atop it was yellowed, the writing unmistakable. Ethan stared. "That's mine." Celeste nodded. "You drew that schematic the night I was grounded in your hangar. You left it behind when you went back to your workbench. I kept it. After the incident in Montana, I submitted it anonymously to an aviation think tank I support. They cross-referenced it with their emergency response systems. The reroute saved 34 lives. Ethan took a slow step forward, hands trembling slightly. "You put this here. I asked them to feature it as part of the Unsung Innovators display." He was quiet. Then softly, "You shouldn't have." "No," she said gently. "I needed to, because not all heroes wear lab coats or have PhDs. Some wear flannel and fix things in the dark without asking for thanks." He looked at the glass case at his own handwriting immortalized under lights, not for fame, not for ego, but as proof that quiet work, honest work, mattered. "I didn't know anyone even noticed," he said. "I did." He turned to her then, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Why?" he asked. "Why do all this? Why go to so much trouble?" Celeste stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I needed to believe there were still people like you out there. And when I found you, I didn't just find a mechanic. I found the kind of man who reminded me of everything real, everything I lost along the way." The air shifted. And for the first time, Ethan reached out, not hesitant this time, not unsure, and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. She leaned into the touch eyes, never leaving his. "Don't leave tonight," she said quietly. "Not yet." He didn't answer with words, he just nodded. Later they sat outside on a terrace overlooking the hills, the stars sharp and clear above them. Celeste curled her hands around a mug of tea. Ethan leaned back, his tie, long-forgotten top button, undone at ease, in a way that was rare for him. "I think I could get used to this," she said. "This?" he asked. "Suit and tie events and spotlight honors." "No," she said, smiling. "This kind of night. This kind of quiet. This kind of man." He looked over at her, and for once he didn't question what came next. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. And in that moment, under stars that had watched over dreamers for centuries, two people who never expected to find love in the wreckage of their own lives discovered something they'd almost forgotten how to believe in a beginning. The road back from the symposium was long and winding, cutting through amber plains and silver hills under a sky smeared with early morning gold. Ethan drove with the window cracked open, the dry desert air curling into the cab like memory. In the passenger seat sat the small plaque they'd handed him after his keynote. "Recognition for outstanding field innovation," it read. He hadn't wanted to take it. Still wasn't sure he deserved it. But Celeste had slipped it under his arm and whispered, "Just accept the thank you, Ethan." Now, as the hangar came into view, rising out of the dust like something older than time, he felt a surprising wave of calm. Home. It didn't matter how many handshakes he'd received or how many suits had nodded in his direction. This place, its dust, its noise, its rusted beauty was where he still belonged. And yet, he couldn't ignore the tug in his chest, because for the first time in years he wasn't just fixing machines. He was building something. People had started to come, young, eager, sometimes lost. He saw in them not just potential, but versions of himself from long ago, and that perhaps frightened him more than the attention did. He parked, opened the hangar door, and found Louise already there, hunched over a disassembled carburetor. "You're early," Ethan said. Louise glanced up with a smirk. "You're late," Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Teenagers these days. I watched your speech," Louise said. "Celeste posted it on the fellowship site." Ethan blinked. "She did," Louise nodded. "It was cool. You didn't sound like the other guys. You sounded like one of us. That hit harder than it should have." Ethan sat beside him on the bench. "Well, I am one of you," Louise shrugged. "Maybe. But the others are saying you could go big now. Start a company, move to the city, be famous or something." Ethan didn't answer right away. Then I got an offer. Luis turned. For what new facility? East Coast, clean, big top-tier resources. They want me to head a think tank, high-level aviation solutions. Pays more than I'd make in 10 years here. Luis was quiet for a long time. Then carefully, are you going to take it? Ethan stared at the engine part in his hand. I don't know yet. That evening, the sun hung low like a lantern on its last wick. Celeste arrived just as the wind began to rise, her car dusted with red clay and her sleeves rolled up. She looked less like a CEO and more like a woman finally breathing her own air. You came back, Ethan said, meeting her at the gate. I told you I wasn't done here, she replied, smiling. And besides, I had a feeling you'd be brooding about something. He raised an eyebrow. I don't brood. You absolutely brood. She followed him into the hangar where the late sunlight filtered through the skylight and lit the space in gold. The air smelled like oil and iron and possibility. I got an offer, he said after a moment. She didn't react right away. You going to take it? I don't know. You're allowed to say yes. I know, but you don't want to, she said quietly. More statement than question. He looked at her eyes, steady. I want to say yes to the right thing, not just the shiny thing. Celeste walked to the back of the hangar where the chalkboard had become a messy mix of notes, diagrams, and hopeful ideas. She placed her hand on one corner where Luis had drawn a crude airplane beside his name. This place matters, she said, because it's honest, because no one here is pretending to be something they're not. He walked over, standing beside her. They told me I could train the best minds, that I could be the bridge between innovation and application. She turned to him. Ethan, you already are. But what if this is all small potatoes compared to what I could do? She met his gaze, gently but firmly. Don't measure the size of your impact by the square footage of a building. Measure it by the lives that change because you stayed where you were most needed. He let that settle. And then she said the words he hadn't dared let himself believe. I want to build this place with you. He looked at her uncertain. You mean I've had boardrooms and billion-dollar projects, but I've never had this, something real. I want to be here not as a sponsor, not as a visitor, but as someone who rolls up her sleeves and gets her hands dirty. Ethan blinked. You sure? Celeste stepped closer. I've never been more sure of anything. And for a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of decisions of lives lived, and lives yet to come, hung in the air like the last note of a song. Then quietly, Ethan reached into his back pocket and pulled out the letterhead contract he'd been carrying around all day, the East Coast job, the big offer. He folded it once, then again, and dropped it in the nearby trash bin. Celeste didn't smile. She simply stepped forward and rested her forehead gently against his, and that was enough. No declarations, no fireworks, just a shared silence that said, this is where we choose each other, and this is where it begins. The rain came again in the quiet hours before dawn, not a storm this time, but a soft, steady rhythm that tapped against the hangar roof like an old friend knocking gently to say, I'm still here. Ethan sat alone at the workbench, the one his father built by hand 30 years ago. A steaming cup of coffee rested beside a weathered wooden box, hinges, rusted corners chipped. It was his father's memory box, something he hadn't opened in years. Not because he didn't care, but because he hadn't been ready to hear what it might say. Now, as life tilted gently in a new direction, community, growing love, rekindling purpose, deepening, he knew it was time. He opened the lid. Inside were pieces of another man's life, an old compass, a silver tie clip, an embroidered patch from the airline where Harold McCabe had worked. Beneath these, folded with meticulous care, lay a sealed envelope addressed in blocky handwriting. To Ethan, when you're ready. His throat tightened. With hands that suddenly felt too large, Ethan opened the envelope and unfolded the pages. His father's voice rose from the paper like smoke from a campfire, warm, direct, steady. "Son, if you're reading this, then I figure life's brought you to one of those big intersections. I hope it didn't take losing too much to get here. I didn't always know how to talk to you about what mattered. I was better with machines than feelings. But there's something I want you to remember. People like us, we don't always end up on magazine covers. We're not flashy. We're not the kind to chase the loudest dream. But what we build, what we fix, lasts. Don't let the world tell you that you're small because you chose to stay grounded. Roots are what keep good things from blowing away. If someone comes along and sees the worth in what you've built, don't push them away. Not everyone gets a second chance at something real. And son, kindness. Kindness is the one tool that never wears out. Use it, even when no one's watching, especially then. I'm proud of the man I know you've become, even if you don't quite believe it yet. Keep your feet on the ground and your heart open to the sky. Dad. Ethan read it once. Then again. By the third time, the words blurred behind unshed tears. Not of grief, but of release. His father had never told him directly that he was proud. Not in so many words, but he'd shown it through every lesson, every shared hour in the hangar, every quiet presence that steadied Ethan when he doubted himself most. Now, years later, those words arrived like a bridge from the past to the present, like permission to stop running from a version of himself he'd always been afraid was too small. When the sun rose, it brought with it the scent of wet earth and the subtle sound of tires on gravel. Celeste's SUV came to a stop beside the hangar. She stepped out carrying a tray of breakfast sandwiches and 2 thermoses of fresh coffee. Her hair was pulled back, her cheeks flushed from the chill in the air. "You been up all night?" she asked as she entered. Something like that. He handed her the letter. No words. She read it silently, eyes scanning with reverence. When she finished, she held it to her chest and nodded. "That's a good man," she said. He was. Still is in the ways that matter. They sat together on a wooden bench by the office window. Outside, the clouds broke apart in long strips of light that danced across the runway. A new day, not just in time, but in shape, had arrived. Louise asked me yesterday if I believed people could be made for something, Celeste said. "What did you tell him?" I said, "I don't believe people are made for anything. I think they choose." Again and again every day, and over time those choices turn into a life. Ethan nodded, gazing at the empty tarmac. "I've been choosing the same thing for a long time. Silence. Safety. Staying small so I wouldn't be disappointed." She turned toward him, her voice soft but firm. "Then choose something bigger now." "I want to," he said. "Not for recognition, but because if I don't give this place everything I have, I'll regret it." "Then don't hold back." A quiet moment passed. "I've been thinking," Ethan said. "What if we take the foundation money, match it with local grants, and build out that second hangar, one side for restoration, the other for training, and maybe open up the summer to apprenticeships?" Her eyes sparkled. "I thought you'd never ask." He smiled. "I thought I never would." They leaned back into the bench, watching the sky open wider. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of trust, of shared dreams of a future not yet mapped, but already meaningful. A future neither of them would walk into alone. That afternoon, Celeste found herself in the back corner of the hangar, painting over a battered tool chest with white primer. Ethan stood nearby, hanging a new sign carved by hand from reclaimed wood. McCabe and Harrington Aviation plus training. Simple, humble, true. Just like them. Luis entered carrying a box of spark plugs, and behind him came two new faces, twins from the foster center, both barely 16 eyes wide as they took in the hangar. Ethan smiled and waved them in. "We'll find you something to get your hands dirty," he said. Celeste looked at him, at the man who had once chosen a quiet life of solitude because he thought it was all he was allowed. Now here he was, creating a place where others could rise, where second chances weren't a gift but a given, where love wasn't about grand gestures but daily kindness. That night, after the last light had gone and the hangar doors were locked, Ethan and Celeste stood outside, shoulder to shoulder beneath a sky scattered with stars. He looked up, then down at her. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For walking back into my life," she smiled. "You didn't make it easy." "No," he admitted, "but you made it matter." She reached out, laced her fingers through his, and beneath the quiet roar of the wind, they both heard what neither dared say aloud: "This is home now." The hangar was louder than usual, not from engines, but from laughter. It began as a low murmur early that Saturday morning, bootsteps on concrete, the clatter of toolboxes being opened, Luis arguing playfully with the twin boys over socket sizes. Someone had brought in a speaker, and a low Motown rhythm filled the space, mixing with the scent of fresh paint rubber and fried eggs from a food truck parked outside. Ethan stood near the large side door, his arms crossed, surveying the controlled chaos with a kind of quiet awe. The second hangar, once nothing but a dusty shell, was now fully open, with new aluminum workstations and overhead LED lighting that hummed softly above rows of students hunched over their projects. They wore coveralls donated by Celeste's foundation, each embroidered with a first name on the pocket and MCT stitched above the heart. McCabe and Harrington Aviation Training. A name that didn't just belong to him anymore. It belonged to every single kid who walked through that door, believing they were only as good as their grades, their broken homes, or the zip code they came from, and slowly realized they were capable of more. He stepped out into the morning sun, where folding chairs were set in neat rows facing a makeshift stage. Banners fluttered in the breeze. Signs hand-painted by students read, "Flight begins on the ground," and "Fixing engines, building futures." At the center of it all was Celeste clipboard in hand hair, in a loose ponytail, sleeves rolled up, giving instructions to two volunteers while also trying to calm a nervous student who'd lost his note cards for the big presentation. "You don't need the cards, Milo," she said gently. "You just need to speak from the heart." Milo, no older than 15, nodded hesitantly. She squeezed his shoulder before he turned and scurried backstage. Ethan approached, hands tucked into his pockets. "You've got a real gift, you know," that Celeste raised an eyebrow. "For public speaking, for making people believe in themselves." She smiled at that. "Funny, I used to be paid to inspire shareholders. Now I'd rather spend a day convincing a teenager he's worth something." "You've got the better end of the deal." They stood in a moment of shared quiet, letting the day move around them. Celeste glanced toward the crowd assembling. "Are you ready?" Ethan shifted on his feet. "Not really. You've spoken to a room full of engineers and corporate executives," she teased. He grinned. "Yeah, but those people were strangers. These kids, they're family." When the event began, the sun had climbed high enough to bathe the stage in a warm golden glow. The folding chairs were filled, parents, neighbors, donors, local press, and even a few aviation professionals who had flown in just to see what the buzz was about. Mrs. Goodwin introduced Ethan with a short, proud speech, calling him a mechanic with the soul of a teacher and the heart of a builder. The applause that followed was thunderous, more felt than heard. Ethan stepped up to the mic, blinking once at the sea of faces. He didn't bring a speech. He didn't need one. "Thank you," he said, "for coming, for believing in this place." He paused, letting the wind carry his words across the crowd. "I used to think my job was just to fix engines, find the crack, replace the part, move on. But one night on a stormy runway, I met someone who reminded me that people break too, and they need fixing just the same. With patience, with kindness, with a chance." He turned, slightly motioning toward the students sitting in the front row. These young men and women, some of them have been told their whole lives what they can't do, that they're too small, too poor, too far behind. But I see nothing but builders here, fixers, flyers, dreamers. He looked down for a beat, then back up. "I've learned that the greatest machines we'll ever work on aren't made of bolts and steel. They're made of hope. And this hangar isn't just about repairing jets. It's about restoring people. And today I hope we all take off together." The crowd rose in applause, but it wasn't the standing ovation that got to Ethan. It was the look on Celeste's face. Not pride, but joy. The kind that said this was always meant to be. After the event, as the crowd trickled into conversations and tours, Celeste led Ethan toward the back of the lot, where an empty concrete slab waited. Framed with flags and string lights, it looked unfinished but hopeful. "I think we should build housing here," she said, "for kids who have nowhere else to go, dorm-style, safe, affordable, run by the community." Ethan looked at her, stunned. "You've been holding on to that idea for a while, haven't you?" "I wanted to wait until you believed this dream was permanent." He didn't say anything. Instead, he took her hand and laced their fingers together. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. She leaned into him. "Neither am I." That night, the hangar lights glowed like lanterns as students played music, danced, and celebrated. Someone grilled hot dogs out back. Others projected an old aviation documentary on the hangar wall. Laughter echoed off the metal beams, rich and unfiltered. In a corner of the hangar, Louise approached Ethan with a nervous grin and a folded envelope. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "A letter," Louise said. "Assignment from school. We had to write about someone who changed our lives. I wrote about you." Ethan unfolded the paper slowly. Louise had written in block letters, careful but imperfect. "You gave me more than a place to learn. You gave me a reason to stay. You made me believe I could be something. Thank you for seeing me." Ethan blinked hard, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. Louise looked down, awkward. "It's not like perfect?" "It's perfect," Ethan said. And in that moment, surrounded by students, laughter engines, and light, Ethan McCabe understood the truth his father had written years before. Kindness never wears out. It only multiplies. The morning after the celebration dawned soft and golden, the kind of light that didn't shout but whispered gently against the windows and hunger walls. The desert air was crisp, freshened by the lingering scent of last night's laughter, grilled food, and the faint traces of engine oil. Inside the hangar, empty cups and folded chairs sat like quiet proof that something unforgettable had happened. Ethan stood alone on the tarmac just beyond the doors, a mug of coffee cradled in his calloused hands. His gaze traced the horizon, where the sky stretched endlessly wide, patient and full of promise. Behind him, voices began to stir. Celeste's laughter, bright, unrehearsed, floated through the hangar doors. Louise was teaching Milo how to torque a bolt properly. One of the twins asked if they could paint their names on the side wall next to the workshop motto. And somewhere in the distance, Mrs. Goodwin was leading a group of new volunteers through the classroom space. A place that had once been silent was now brimming with life. And Ethan. For the first time in a very long while, he wasn't just a man fixing broken parts. He was a man who had been rebuilt, too. Later that afternoon, Celeste found him beneath the old tree just behind the training lot. It had stood for years, gnarled and bent, its branches twisted from wind and age, but still it stood. Still it grew. She sat beside him, bringing a picnic basket filled with lunch they didn't really need. "You've been quiet," she said, offering him a sandwich. "I'm just listening," he replied, "trying to hold on to all this. It almost feels like a dream." She leaned back against the tree. "Funny, I used to live in a world full of everything money, power, attention, and felt like I was sleepwalking through it." Ethan looked at her. "And now," she said softly, "I feel awake, fully." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the students filter in and out of the hangar like bees moving through a hive. Every face held purpose, every step carried possibility. "I've been thinking," Celeste said after a while. "We should build a scholarship fund, not just here, nationwide. Small aviation centers, rural schools, programs that teach kids who've been told their dreams are too big or their lives too broken." Ethan smiled, the kind that begins in the heart and works outward. "You never stop dreaming big, do you? I used to dream big for companies. Now I want to dream big for people." He nodded. "I'll be right beside you." She reached for his hand. "Always." He turned to her eyes. "Steady." "Always." Weeks passed. The training center grew busier. New faces arrived every few days, young men and women hungry to learn to belong. The second hangar buzzed with tools and teaching. A third was already being drafted. One afternoon, a team from a major aviation magazine showed up unexpectedly. They'd heard about the Montana Rescue, the Foundation scholarships, the desert hangar that saved lives. They wanted to write a feature story. Ethan nearly declined. But Celeste, smiling as she leaned on the office doorframe, said, "Let the world see what kindness can build." So he agreed, but only if the kids got the front cover. The issue came out 3 weeks later. The headline read, "The Engine of Hope: How One Mechanic and One Runaway Bride Built Something That Can't Be Bought." It sold out in days, but Ethan never hung it on a wall. Instead, he tucked a single copy into the memory box beside his father's old letter. That was enough. On a cool Sunday evening, Ethan and Celeste sat on the hood of his dusty truck, parked just outside the hangar. Overhead, the sky stretched out in full Technicolor blues, melting into lavender stars, just beginning to show their faces. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying the scent of gasoline and sagebrush. "I never asked," Celeste said, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "If you could go back to the beginning of it all, before the storm, before the engine, before the runaway, would you do anything differently?" He thought about it for a moment, then answered, "No." "Because the broken parts led us here," she smiled. "You always did believe in fixing things." He looked down at her. "Not everything broken needs to be thrown away. Sometimes it just needs someone to believe it's still worth saving." She closed her eyes and exhaled. "We saved each other, didn't we?" He nodded. "Yeah, we did." Above them, a plane crossed the dusky sky, its wings catching the last light like a promise. And so it was that in the middle of the desert, far from boardrooms and wedding headlines, far from corporate titles and forgotten pain, a man and a woman built something lasting. Not a mansion, not a legacy bound in gold, but a home, a place where hands were taught to mend, where hearts were taught to trust, and where the sky above stretched wide enough to carry second chances, dreams reborn, and love quiet, steady, true. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories just like this one. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, take care, be kind, and keep believing in second chances.